My name is Audrey, and when I first stepped into the yoga studio that evening, I had no idea how much my life was about to change. I had signed up for the class simply because I needed a break from the endless cycle of work, social obligations, and a relationship that had started to feel more like a chore than a source of comfort. Brian, my boyfriend, was sweet in his own way, but every time we sat across from each other in silence at dinner, I realized how much of myself I was leaving hidden, buried beneath polite smiles and small talk. Yoga seemed like an escape, a chance to breathe, to stretch, to remember that my body could feel alive again. The studio itself was warm and inviting. The faint smell of sandalwood floated in the air, soft music hummed in the background, and the polished wooden floor reflected the glow of the candles lined along the walls. I rolled out my mat in the middle of the room, hoping to blend in, but I was restless. I adjusted my top, tied my hair back, and tried to focus on my breathing. My mind, however, kept slipping into that familiar loop of questions. Why was I staying with Brian when I felt so disconnected? Why did I avoid answering his texts? Why did I no longer look forward to seeing him? Then the door opened, and she walked in. Eva. At first, she didn't say a word. She simply moved across the room with calm grace, as if the space itself belonged to her. Her presence was undeniable. She wore simple clothes, a fitted black top and flowing yoga pants, her dark hair tied back with strands falling loose near her face. But it wasn't her appearance alone that caught me, it was the way she carried herself. Her posture was strong yet relaxed, her gaze steady yet gentle, and when she finally spoke to the group, her voice wrapped around me like silk. "Let's begin by grounding ourselves," she said, her tone both soothing and commanding. I tried to mimic the others, inhaling deeply and closing my eyes, but my awareness kept drifting toward her. It felt ridiculous. I barely knew this woman, yet something about her already stirred a quiet storm inside me. The class moved through the first sequence, and I struggled with the unfamiliar poses. My balance wavered, my arms trembled, and I silently cursed myself for not being more flexible. Just as I was about to give up on holding a position, I felt a hand at my waist. Firm, steady, careful. "Breathe here," she whispered close to my ear, her voice a low murmur. The warmth of her palm spread across my side, and I felt my whole body react. It was a correction, nothing more than what any instructor would do, yet the effect it had on me was overwhelming. My chest tightened, my breath caught, and for a brief second I forgot the pose entirely. When I steadied myself again, she gave me the smallest nod, as if to say, "Good, you found it." From that moment on, every adjustment she made seemed to echo through me. When she guided my shoulders back, I felt my heart open. When she pressed lightly between my shoulder blades, I sensed a current of heat rise along my skin. Each touch was fleeting, professional, but I couldn't deny the way my mind lingered on it long after she had moved to another student. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just caught up in the novelty of the moment. But as the session went on, the more I noticed her eyes meeting mine, the more I became aware of how intently she seemed to study me, as though she could sense the conflict unraveling inside me. By the time class ended, I was both exhausted and strangely exhilarated. My muscles ached, sweat clung to my skin, yet I felt more awake than I had in months. I was gathering my things when she approached. "You did well," she said, smiling, her green eyes lighting up in the dim glow of the studio. I froze for a heartbeat, then forced myself to respond. "Thank you." I was struggling at first, but it had felt different toward the end. Easier somehow. "That's because you let go," she replied, tilting her head slightly. "The body knows how to move when the mind stops resisting." Her words struck me deeper than I expected. They weren't just about yoga. She seemed to be speaking to something else, something I hadn't admitted even to myself. We talked briefly after that, just surface details, but I caught myself studying the curve of her lips when she spoke, the way her hand brushed a strand of hair from her face. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that I was only curious, but when I left the studio that night, the memory of her touch still lingered like a spark under my skin. At home, Brian was waiting. He asked about my class, and I gave him vague answers. It was good. Tiring but good. He didn't notice the way my eyes drifted, didn't see how distracted I was. He kissed my cheek absent-mindedly and turned back to his phone. I wanted to feel something, anything, but all I felt was distance. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, my thoughts kept circling back to Eva. The way she had spoken, the warmth of her hand at my waist, the quiet confidence in her gaze. I told myself it was silly, that I was overthinking a simple yoga class, yet the memory grew brighter instead of fading. My chest tightened with the realization that I had never reacted this way to Brian, not even in the beginning of our relationship. The next week, I returned to the studio. I told myself it was about discipline, about building a healthier routine, but deep down I knew I was going back because of her. I rolled out my mat again, my heart racing in anticipation, and when she entered the room, I felt that same rush sweep through me. During class, she came to adjust my posture once more. This time her hand pressed lightly on my back, guiding me deeper into a stretch. "Breathe through it," she said, and I did, inhaling until the air filled every part of me. My body trembled, not from strain, but from the closeness of her. When I straightened again, she gave me that same quiet nod, and something in me swelled with pride. I couldn't deny it any longer. These weren't ordinary reactions. Something about Eva was pulling me in, stirring a desire I had never known before. It frightened me, but it also thrilled me. For the first time in years, I felt awake, alive, and I didn't want that feeling to stop. When class ended, she approached again. "You're improving quickly," she said, her eyes lingering on mine. "I'm trying," I replied, smiling nervously. "You don't need to try so hard," she answered softly. "Just allow yourself to feel." The way she said it, the way her voice dipped lower, made my pulse quicken. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but instead I nodded and looked away, afraid she might see too much written on my face. Later, walking home through the quiet streets, I couldn't stop replaying her words. "Allow yourself to feel." They echoed in my mind long after I reached my apartment. Brian was already asleep on the couch, the television casting a pale glow across his face. I covered him with a blanket and retreated to my room, closing the door behind me. In the silence, I admitted what I had been resisting. Something had shifted inside me, and Eva was at the center of it. That night, as I closed my eyes, I felt the ghost of her hand at my waist, steady and reassuring. My breath slowed, my body softened, and in the dark I whispered to myself, almost in disbelief, "What's happening to me?" But I already knew. The days that followed felt heavier, not because of work or routine, but because of the storm I carried inside me. Every time I tried to focus on something else, my thoughts returned to the studio, to the calm music, to the warmth of Eva's hands, to the way her words seemed to cut through the noise of my mind. I told myself it was only admiration, perhaps even a temporary fascination, but the more I tried to dismiss it, the stronger it became. When I walked into the next class, I caught her eyes almost immediately. She smiled, not the polite kind of smile you give a stranger, but something softer, something that lingered. My body tensed, but at the same time I felt myself open under her gaze. She began guiding the group, her voice steady, and I let myself sink into every instruction. It was easier now, not because my body had grown more flexible, but because I wanted to please her, to show her that I was listening. At one point she came to me again, kneeling beside my mat, adjusting the line of my arms. Her fingers brushed against mine, and for a second the rest of the room dissolved. I looked at her, and she looked back, not hurried, not embarrassed. There was a spark there, unspoken, undeniable. After class ended, she approached as I rolled up my mat. "Do you want to join me for tea?" she asked, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. I hesitated, though not because I didn't want to. My instinct was to say yes immediately, but I felt Brian's shadow creep over me, reminding me that I was still tethered to a relationship I couldn't name as love anymore. Still, my mouth formed the answer before I could think. "Yes," I said. We walked to a small cafe around the corner. It was quiet, with wooden tables and plants lining the walls. She ordered chamomile, and I asked for the same, not because it was my favorite, but because I wanted to share what she chose. Sitting across from her, I felt like I was in a different world. She leaned forward when she spoke, resting her chin in her hand, and everything she said carried a weight that made me listen as if my life depended on it. We talked about small things at first, her love for meditation, my constant struggle with stress, the way the city felt suffocating sometimes. But soon the conversation deepened. She told me about her travels, the years she had spent searching for balance, how yoga had saved her from falling into a life that didn't fit her. I told her about my studies, about the way I often felt invisible, even in the company of people who claimed to care about me. She listened intently, never interrupting, never dismissing. And when she spoke, her words touched places I had kept locked for so long. "You're not invisible," she said, her eyes fixed on mine. "You're just hiding from yourself." That sentence sat with me like a truth I had been waiting to hear. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the rush of emotion that threatened to spill out. We lingered at the cafe until the candles on the tables burned low. When it was time to leave, she walked me part of the way home. The air outside was cool, and I wished the walk could stretch forever. At my door, she paused. "Thank you for tonight," I said, suddenly aware of how much it meant to me. "It was my pleasure," she replied, her voice low. For a moment it seemed like she might reach for me, but instead she simply smiled again and left. That night, I lay awake replaying every moment, every glance, every brush of her fingers. The warmth of her presence had seeped into me, and it scared me. Beside me, Brian shifted in his sleep, unaware. I turned away, clutching the pillow, torn between guilt and the undeniable pull toward someone else. The following weeks became a blur of anticipation. I went to every class, my heart quickening each time Eva looked at me. Sometimes she corrected my posture, other times she simply observed from across the room, but her attention never felt accidental. After class, we began to meet more often, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes just for a walk. The conversations grew longer, and the silences between us became comfortable. One evening, as we strolled through a park, the sky painted in soft hues of dusk, she asked me about Brian. "You've never mentioned him," she said gently. I stiffened. "He's someone I've been with for a while." "Are you happy with him?" she asked. The question pierced me, simple but devastating. I opened my mouth, but no answer came. My silence was louder than any denial. She didn't push further, only nodded as if she already knew. I returned home that night feeling raw. Brian greeted me with a smile, but when he leaned in to kiss me, I felt nothing. His lips touched mine, yet my mind was somewhere else, with someone else. I pulled away quickly, pretending to be tired. He looked hurt, but didn't press. I hated myself for it, hated the deception, yet I couldn't let go of Eva. The way she made me feel was incomparable. Every time I thought of her, my chest ached with a mixture of longing and fear. Another week passed, and after class, Eva suggested we visit an art exhibit. The gallery was nearly empty, the dim light casting shadows across the walls. We walked slowly, pausing at each piece, and I found myself watching her more than the paintings. She spoke softly about color and form, about the way art reflected hidden emotions. At one point, she stopped in front of a canvas filled with chaotic brushstrokes. "This reminds me of you," she said. I frowned. "Why?" "Because beneath all that chaos, there's something beautiful waiting to be seen." Her words made my breath hitch. I turned to look at her, and for a moment, the distance between us seemed unbearable. My body leaned forward unconsciously, but I pulled back, terrified of what might happen if I crossed that line. We left the gallery and walked to the river. The night air was crisp, and the city lights shimmered on the water. She sat on a bench, and I joined her, silence wrapping around us. I wanted to speak, to confess the whirlwind inside me, but the words stuck in my throat. Finally, she broke the silence. "You don't have to pretend with me," she said. I looked at her, startled. "Pretend?" "That you're not feeling what you're feeling," she replied softly. "I can see it." My chest tightened, and I turned away, ashamed. I don't know what I'm feeling, I admitted, my voice trembling. That's okay, she said, reaching out to touch my hand. Her fingers brushed mine lightly, sending a shiver through me. You don't need to know everything right now. Just allow yourself to feel. Her touch lingered, not forceful, not insistent, just there, patient and warm. My heart pounded, and for a moment I wanted nothing more than to close the gap, to surrender to whatever this was. But fear held me back, fear of what it would mean for Brian, for my family, for the life I thought I was supposed to live. When I finally pulled my hand away, she didn't look disappointed. She simply smiled gently as though she understood. That night, I cried quietly in my room. Not because I was sad, but because I was overwhelmed. I had tasted a connection so powerful, and I knew there was no turning back. Days turned into weeks, and my bond with Eva deepened. We didn't cross any boundaries yet, but every interaction carried unspoken weight. The way she looked at me during class, the way she walked beside me on quiet streets, the way her hand brushed against mine as though by accident, but lingered just a moment too long. At home, things with Brian grew colder. He noticed my distance, confronted me one evening, asking why I was so distracted. I mumbled excuses, blaming work, blaming stress, but he saw through it. His frustration grew, and so did my guilt. Yet no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't erase Eva from my mind. One Saturday, she invited me to her home for tea after practice. I hesitated, but curiosity outweighed fear. Her apartment was warm and elegant, filled with books, plants, and the faint scent of lavender. We sat by the window, sipping tea, sunlight spilling across the floor. The setting felt intimate, almost too intimate, and I found myself nervous, hyper-aware of every movement, every glance. She told me stories about her travels, about nights spent under foreign skies, about learning to let go of the past. I listened, fascinated, realizing how much life she had lived compared to me. At one point, she laughed at a memory, and the sound filled the room like music. I couldn't help smiling, not because of the story, but because of her. When I left that evening, she walked me to the door. We stood there for a long moment, the silence heavy with unspoken things. She reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, her fingers brushing my skin. I froze, my heart racing, torn between running and staying. "Good night, Audrey," she said softly. "Good night," I whispered, barely able to breathe. As I walked away, I knew something irreversible had begun. The days began to blur into one another, but within that blur a single thread pulled me forward. It was always her. I woke with her voice echoing in my ears, and I fell asleep with the memory of her eyes holding mine longer than anyone else ever dared. Brian noticed the shift, but he didn't understand the depth of it. He asked why I was always distracted, and I gave vague answers, excuses that even I didn't believe. He grew restless while I withdrew further. Every time he tried to reach for me, I felt myself shrink, not because I hated him, but because someone else had already awakened a part of me that he could never touch. Eva's presence had become a constant in my life. We shared tea after classes, we walked together through quiet streets, and sometimes we sat in silence that said more than words. She never pushed, never asked for more than I was willing to give, yet the energy between us grew with every passing day. I began to crave her nearness, to long for the brush of her hand against mine, for the sound of her voice cutting through the noise of my mind. One evening, after a long class, she suggested we take a walk in the park. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. The path stretched ahead, dimly lit by scattered lamps. I walked beside her, my pulse quickening with every step. At times our hands swung so close they almost touched, and the space between our arms felt electric. "You've been quiet tonight," she said softly. "I'm always quiet," I replied, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. "No," she said, glancing at me with a small smile. "This is different. Something is weighing on you." I inhaled, trying to steady myself. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore. With Brian, with myself. Everything feels wrong except when I'm with you." The words escaped before I could stop them. My chest tightened, and I looked away, terrified of what she might think. But she didn't laugh or look surprised. She stopped walking, and when I turned back, she was facing me, her eyes calm and unwavering. "Then stop fighting it," she said quietly. Her words cut through me like lightning. I felt exposed, raw, unable to hide. My throat went dry as I tried to form a response, but nothing came. She stepped closer, closing the small distance between us. Her hand lifted, fingers brushing against my cheek. The warmth of her touch spread through me, igniting every nerve. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then she leaned in. Her lips touched mine, feather-light at first, so soft I almost thought I imagined it. But the reality of it flooded me instantly. A rush of heat surged through my chest, and my knees weakened. I had kissed Brian countless times, yet none of those moments had ever unraveled me like this. This was not routine, this was not comfort, this was fire wrapped in gentleness. I gasped softly, and she pulled back just enough to look at me. Her forehead rested against mine, her breath warm on my skin. "This isn't wrong," she whispered. "What's wrong is pretending it isn't real." I wanted to argue, to tell her that I was confused, that I was afraid, that Brian was still waiting for me at home. But my body betrayed me. My hands lifted, trembling, and I touched her shoulders, pulling her closer. Our lips met again, this time deeper, fuller. The kiss grew, not rushed, but filled with hunger that had been building for weeks. Her hand slid into my hair, and I let out a sound I didn't recognize, a sound that came from the very core of me. When we finally pulled apart, I was trembling. My heart pounded so hard I thought she must hear it. "I can't," I whispered, though the taste of her lingered on my lips. "You already did," she said gently, her thumb brushing along my jaw. And it felt right. Tears stung my eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming truth of her words. I wanted to speak, but instead I buried my face against her shoulder, breathing her in. She wrapped her arms around me, holding me close, steadying me against the storm. When I finally stepped back, the night seemed different. The park lights glowed brighter, the air felt sharper, every sound carried a strange clarity. I knew something had shifted permanently. We walked in silence after that, our hands brushing occasionally, but neither of us forcing more. When we reached my street, she stopped again. "You don't have to decide everything tonight," she said. "Just know that I'm here. No rush. No pressure." I nodded, unable to speak, and watched as she turned and walked away. Her silhouette faded into the shadows, yet the imprint of her kiss burned on my lips. At home, Brian was waiting. He asked where I had been, his tone sharper than usual. I mumbled something about staying late at the studio. He frowned, searching my face for answers I couldn't give. When he reached for me, I flinched. His hands felt foreign, as if they belonged to another life. I pulled away, claiming exhaustion, and went straight to bed. But lying there in the dark, I couldn't escape the memory of Eva's mouth on mine. The warmth of her embrace followed me into sleep, and for the first time in years, I dreamed of something that felt like freedom. The following days were chaos inside me. I avoided Brian as much as I could, yet guilt gnawed at me. He tried to make plans to draw me back in, but every attempt only highlighted how far I had drifted. Meanwhile, every message from Eva, every glance in class, every accidental touch, sent waves of desire through me. One afternoon, after a particularly intense session, she invited me for a walk by the river. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the water reflected their gray weight. We strolled slowly, our conversation meandering between trivial things and deeper confessions. At one point, she asked me what scared me most. "Losing control," I admitted. "You're not losing it," she replied softly. "You're finding it." Her words sank into me, and I felt tears sting my eyes again. I turned my face away, embarrassed, but she reached for my hand. This time I didn't pull back. Her fingers intertwined with mine, and I held on, the simple gesture grounding me. The closeness between us grew heavier with each meeting. Every time I thought I could keep my distance, she dismantled my defenses with a smile, a look, a touch. And every time, I surrendered a little more. One evening, I stayed after class, lingering as the others left. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. "Something on your mind?" she asked, leaning against the wall. "Everything," I said, laughing nervously. She stepped closer, closing the space between us once more. The studio was quiet, the candles burning low. Her presence filled the room, and I felt myself drawn to her like a tide to the shore. She lifted her hand again, brushing her fingers along my face, and I leaned into the touch without hesitation. The kiss that followed was deeper than before, no longer tentative but certain. I pressed into her, my arms wrapping around her neck, my body trembling with release. The world outside the studio ceased to exist. There was only the rhythm of our breathing, the heat of her mouth, the undeniable truth that I wanted her more than anything I had ever wanted. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless, my lips tingling, my heart racing. She smiled softly, pressing her forehead to mine. "See," she whispered, "you don't need to be afraid." I nodded, unable to form words. My body still shook, but not from fear. It was exhilaration, a kind of awakening I couldn't have imagined before. That night, I couldn't bring myself to go home. I wandered the streets, replaying the kiss again and again, my emotions colliding inside me. I knew I couldn't keep living a lie with Brian, but I didn't yet have the courage to end it. All I knew was that Eva had cracked something open inside me, and there was no way back. By the time I finally stepped through my front door, dawn was breaking. Brian sat at the table, waiting, his face filled with suspicion. I avoided his eyes, muttered an excuse, and retreated to the bedroom. He didn't follow. The silence between us stretched like an ocean. As I lay there, exhausted and restless, I pressed my fingers to my lips, still swollen from her kiss. The guilt was heavy, but stronger still was the certainty that I had touched something real, something I could no longer deny. The memory of that last kiss stayed with me for days, woven into every moment of silence, every breath I drew when no one was watching. I carried it like a secret flame, hidden beneath layers of hesitation and guilt, yet burning hotter with every hour that passed. Brian's questions grew sharper, his patience shorter, but I could no longer meet his eyes without feeling the weight of deception. I tried to remind myself of who I had been before, the person who fit neatly into the life expected of me, but that version of myself already felt distant, blurred, as though she had never truly existed. When I arrived at the studio one Friday evening, I was already restless. My body yearned for the rhythm of the poses, but more than that, I longed for her presence. Eva greeted me with a calm smile, though her gaze held an intensity that made my heart stumble. Throughout the class, her guidance felt more personal than ever. Each time her hands corrected my posture, my skin seemed to ignite. When her voice lingered on my name, I felt it reverberate inside me. After the session ended, I lingered by the mat, unwilling to leave. The other students filed out, their laughter and chatter fading into the night, until only we remained. She was tidying props, stacking mats in neat piles, and when she looked up, her eyes caught mine. "You seem unsettled," she said gently. "I don't want to go home tonight," I admitted before I could stop myself. The words spilled out, raw and trembling, yet true. She didn't question me, didn't press for explanations. She simply nodded, as though she had expected this moment to come, and said, "Then don't." We walked together to her apartment, the city alive around us yet strangely muted. My senses sharpened with every step, the scent of rain on the pavement, the cool air brushing against my skin, the soft rhythm of her stride beside mine. When we reached her door, she held it open for me, her presence steady and reassuring. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. Candles flickered on the shelves, their glow dancing across the spines of books and the leaves of plants. A faint trace of lavender hung in the air, calming yet intoxicating. I removed my shoes slowly, my hands unsteady, as though each small action carried monumental weight. She watched me with quiet patience, not rushing, not intruding. "Tea?" she asked, breaking the silence. I nodded, grateful for the grounding gesture. She moved into the kitchen, her movements fluid, and I sank onto the couch. My heart thudded against my ribs, each beat echoing louder than the last. When she returned, she placed a steaming cup in front of me, then sat close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from her. We sipped in silence at first, the sound of the rain outside filling the gaps. Then she set her cup down, turning toward me. "Audrey," she said softly, my name stretched like a caress. "What do you want right now?" I opened my mouth but closed it again, overwhelmed by the truth pressing at my lips. Finally, I whispered, "I want to stop running from this." Her eyes softened. She reached out, her fingers brushing against mine, tentative yet steady. I curled my hand into hers, holding on as if it were the only thing keeping me upright. She leaned closer, her breath warm against my cheek, and then her lips met mine. The kiss began tender, unhurried, as though she was giving me time to decide, to choose. But I had already chosen. My hands found their way to her shoulders, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened. Her mouth moved with both gentleness and hunger, coaxing me open, guiding me into a place I had never known before. When we pulled apart, I was breathless. "I'm scared," I confessed, my voice barely audible. "So am I," she admitted, pressing her forehead to mine. "But fear doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it matters." Her honesty unraveled me. I kissed her again, this time with urgency, as though I needed to prove something to myself. She responded with equal intensity, her hands sliding along my back, anchoring me to her. The warmth of her touch seeped through the fabric of my clothes, sending waves of sensation through me. She guided me gently, never rushing, never demanding more than I could give. We moved together with a rhythm that felt inevitable, like tides meeting the shore. When we finally lay side by side on her bed, the room bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, I felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. My body trembled, not from hesitation, but from the overwhelming realization that I was stepping into a truth I had denied for so long. Eva brushed a strand of hair from my face, her eyes searching mine. "You're beautiful," she whispered, and the sincerity in her voice made tears sting my eyes. I kissed her again, letting myself sink into the warmth of her embrace. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only her breath against my skin, her hands steady and sure, her presence filling every space within me. The night stretched on, each moment a revelation. It wasn't about urgency or conquest, but about discovery. Every touch, every sigh, every kiss felt like opening a door I hadn't known was locked. For the first time, I allowed myself to be fully present, to feel without shame, to give without fear. When sleep finally claimed us, I lay with my head resting on her chest, her heartbeat steady beneath my ear. The rain had stopped, and silence wrapped around us like a blanket. I closed my eyes, feeling safer than I had in years. Morning light spilled into the room, soft and golden. I woke slowly, disoriented at first, then remembered where I was. Eva was still beside me, her hair tousled, her face relaxed in sleep. I watched her for a long time, memorizing the curve of her lips, the rise and fall of her chest, the peace etched across her features. A wave of conflicting emotions swept over me. Joy, fear, relief, guilt. I thought of Brian, of the confrontation that awaited me, of the family and friends who would never understand. But then I thought of last night, of the way I had felt alive for the first time, of the serenity that had settled over me as I drifted to sleep in her arms. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Good morning," she murmured, her voice husky with sleep. "Good morning," I whispered back, my chest tightening with affection. "How do you feel?" she asked, stroking my hair. "Terrified," I admitted, "but also whole." She smiled, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "That's enough for now." We lingered in bed, the morning stretching gently around us. Eventually, I rose, pulling on my clothes with trembling hands. She watched me quietly, her gaze steady, unhurried. "You don't have to explain anything today," she said as I slipped on my shoes. "Take your time. Let yourself process." I nodded, grateful for her patience, though dread coiled in my stomach at the thought of facing Brian. When I left her apartment, the city felt different. The colors sharper, the air lighter, the sounds crisper. I had crossed a threshold, and nothing could return me to who I had been before. That afternoon, Brian confronted me. He had grown suspicious, and his frustration finally spilled over. "Where were you last night?" he demanded. I froze, the truth heavy on my tongue. I wanted to tell him everything, to unburden myself, but the words caught in my throat. "I was out," I said weakly. "With who?" His voice cracked, anger and hurt colliding. I couldn't meet his eyes. Silence stretched between us, louder than any confession. Finally, he shook his head, his expression a mixture of disbelief and pain. "You're not the same person anymore," he whispered. He was right. I wasn't. That night, I returned to Eva, not for answers, but for comfort. When she opened the door, I fell into her arms, trembling. She held me close, murmuring soft reassurances, reminding me that change, however painful, was also necessary. In her embrace, I felt both fragile and strong, broken yet whole. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with questions and judgment and loss. But as I lay with her again that night, listening to the steady rhythm of her breath, I also knew this was the beginning of something true. The morning after I returned to Eva's apartment, the clarity I felt was unlike anything before. The world outside seemed sharp, alive, almost too bright, but instead of overwhelming me, it gave me strength. I knew what I had to do, though fear clung to me like a shadow. Avoiding Brian any longer was impossible. The truth had been building between us like an unspoken storm, and it was time to face it. That evening, I sat across from him at the kitchen table. The silence stretched heavy, filled with everything I could no longer hide. He looked at me, eyes tired, shoulders tense, waiting for words I struggled to form. My throat felt dry, but I forced myself to begin. "Brian," I said softly, "I can't keep this going. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because something inside me has changed." His jaw tightened. "Is there someone else?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but not in the way you think. It's not about comparison, it's about me realizing who I am." He leaned back, hurt flashing across his face. "So what does that mean? That I was just a placeholder? That you never really loved me?" I swallowed hard. "I cared for you, I still do, but the connection we had isn't enough anymore. It never reached the part of me that feels alive now. I can't pretend any longer." He stood, pacing the room, his voice sharp. "You've been lying to me. You've been with her, haven't you?" The question cut deep, but I didn't deny it. "Yes." And it made me realize the truth about myself. "I'm not the person you thought I was, and I can't give you what you deserve." His face twisted with anger, but beneath it I saw heartbreak. "So that's it? After everything, you just walk away?" "I'm sorry," I whispered, my chest aching. "But staying would be worse. For both of us." He left the room without another word, and I sat there alone, trembling, but also strangely relieved. The weight of deception had finally lifted, even though the cost was painful. Telling my family was harder. My parents listened in stunned silence as I explained. My mother's first words were filled with disbelief. "But you've always been interested in men. How can you suddenly change?" I tried to steady my voice. "I didn't change overnight. I finally stopped ignoring what I've been feeling." Eva helped me see myself clearly. My father's face was stern, conflicted. He said little, but the silence spoke volumes. They didn't disown me, but the distance was there, thick and suffocating. Some relatives reacted with awkward jokes, others with outright dismissal, as if it was a phase I would outgrow. The reactions from friends varied. Emily, my closest confidant, hugged me tightly and said, "I've never seen you so happy." That's all that matters. But others pulled away, their absence as telling as their words. The circle of people I thought would stand by me grew smaller, yet the few who remained became all the more precious. Through it all, Eva never wavered. She stayed steady beside me, never forcing answers, always reminding me to move at my own pace. This isn't about pleasing anyone else, she told me one evening as we walked by the river. It's about living honestly, even when it's hard. Her calm strength carried me through the rough days. When the doubts returned, she would ground me with a touch, a glance, or a simple reminder that identity isn't fixed, that it evolves as we do. Slowly, I began to believe it. Living together happened naturally, not through a grand decision, but through small choices that accumulated until her space became ours. I left clothes at her place, then books, then pieces of myself I hadn't realized I was ready to share. Soon I was waking up in her arms more often than in my own bed. The rhythm of our lives merged. We cooked together, read in silence on rainy afternoons, and laughed over trivial things that once would have slipped by unnoticed. Of course, there were challenges. Walking hand in hand on the street sometimes drew stares, whispers, even sneers. Family gatherings were tense, the air thick with unspoken disapproval. But when I looked at Eva, when I felt her fingers squeeze mine in reassurance, the noise around us lost its power. With her, I could breathe. One night, as we lay on the couch listening to old records, she asked, "Do you regret it? Leaving everything behind to be with me?" I turned to her, studying the lines of her face softened by the glow of the lamp. "No," I said firmly. It was the hardest choice I've ever made, but it was also the truest. I don't regret finding myself. I don't regret finding you. Her eyes shimmered, and she kissed me gently, as if sealing the promise between us. As months passed, the fear that once dominated me gave way to confidence. I no longer introduced Eva cautiously, as a friend or mentor, but as my partner. The word felt heavy at first, but each time I said it, the weight lessened, replaced by pride. 1 year after that first kiss in the park, I stood in her home, surrounded by the life we had built, and realized how far I had come. I thought of the girl who once sat at the kitchen table with Brian, terrified of speaking the truth. I thought of the woman who avoided her own reflection because she didn't want to see the confusion in her eyes. That person felt like a shadow, someone I had left behind on the path that led me here. Now, I was someone new, someone whole. Eva sat beside me, her hand warm in mine, and asked softly, "Would you do it all again?" I smiled, leaning into her. "Every moment," I whispered. "Because with you, I finally know who I am." And in that quiet space, surrounded by love that had grown out of fear and doubt, I understood that the journey had been worth every tear, every confrontation, every loss. Because it had led me to the one thing I had been searching for all along myself. When I look back at everything that happened, I see how terrifying and beautiful change can be. I once thought my life was set in stone, that the path I was walking with Brian was the one I had to follow no matter how empty it felt. But meeting Eva shattered that illusion. She showed me that sometimes the hardest truths are also the most liberating ones. Loving her forced me to confront my fears, my family, my own reflection, and to admit that the person I had been pretending to be was not the person I truly was. It wasn't easy. There were tears, arguments, silence, and moments where I doubted if I was strong enough to keep moving forward. Yet every time I thought about giving up, Eva reminded me with a touch, a word, or a look that love is never wrong when it's honest. Today, I live a life that finally feels real. It may not fit into everyone's expectations, but it belongs to me, and that's what matters. If you're afraid of following your heart, let this be a reminder. Happiness begins when you stop hiding. This is our story. You are watching She and She.